All right, you guys, we are in for another episode of Tombstone Tea, and it is going to be an awesome one. Today, we are going to talk about the blues. I know you're like, the blues? Yes, the blues. We're going to talk about the Blues Hall of Fame. We're going to talk about the Blues Foundation. We're going to talk about some chess record legends. We're going to talk about a whole lot today. So let's get into it. So the Blues Foundation is an organization that was founded in 1980 in Memphis, Tennessee, and they opened a Blues Hall of Fame museum in 2015, and they are actually they have the Blues Music Awards and host the Blues Music Awards every year, where they pass out a Hall of Fame award. Now, the award started in 1980, and a lot of the awardees honestly are buried here in Chicago. So we're going to just talk about the ones that are buried here in Chicago, and hopefully we'll be able to see the other ones. So if you've seen Cadillac Records, you know that Chess Records was the home of Muddy Waters and Howlin Wolf and Etta James, and it was founded by Phil and Leonard Chess. And here's some photos from the movie. But it was founded by Phil and Leonard Chess here in Chicago, and a lot of those Chess Records inductees were actually in the 1980 inductees. So I know you're like, what is the blues? The blues was formed in the slave fields and the chain gangs of the deep rural South. And it was derived from like old Negro spirituals and chants that detailed woes and discrimination and depression that came from being oppressed and enslaved. It was a precursor to jazz, rock and roll, and R&B. And juke joints were formed after slavery and made blues very, very popular. Most blues musicians, their instrument of choice was the harmonica or the guitar. The Chicago blues sound was created when most of those blues musicians in the South migrated during the Great Migration in the early 20th century. And now we're going to go ahead and talk about some of those legends today. Now, the Blues Foundation main mission is to celebrate blues recordings and performance, expand worldwide awareness of the blues, and to preserve blues heritage. And so they created the Blues Hall of Fame in 1980 to celebrate those who made a strong impact on the blues industry. The first grave that we are going to go visit today is the grave of the first inductee, William Big Bill Broonzy, who's resting in Lincoln Cemetery in Blue Island, Illinois. Born Lee Conley Bradley in 1903, Big Bill actually started his career in country music before switching to the blues. He was one of 17 children. He learned spirituals and folk songs and made his first fiddle out of a cigar box. He arrived in Chicago in the 1920s and learned guitar from minstrel performer Papa Charlie Jackson. And it was through Jackson's connection that he actually auditioned and was a recording artist for Paramount. He worked as a Pullman porter, a cook, a custodian, never giving up on his dream in music. He recorded numerous recordings for Paramount and other recording studios, and he even gained more popularity being asked to fill in a performance at Carnegie Hall. He performed with musicians such as Washboard Sam, Tampa Red, and inspired John Lennon and Paul McCartney of the Beatles. Broonzy was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1958, and he passed away on the way to the hospital at the age of 55. And here he rests at Lincoln Cemetery in Blue Island, Illinois. McKinley Morganfield, also known as Muddy Waters, is known as the father of the modern Chicago blues movement. He is instruments of choice were the guitar and harmonica that he learned at a very young age down in Mississippi, and he was inspired by Robert Johnson and Son House. He moved to Chicago in the 40s and recorded for J. Mayo Williams at Columbia, and also for Aristocrat Records, which was a precursor to Chess Records founded by Phil and Leonard Chess. Muddy's band included Little Walter on the harmonica, Jimmy Rogers on the guitar, Elgin Evans on the drums, Otis Spann on the piano, and Willie Dixon, of course, who we visited before. And we will visit again on this video, who was the bassist and the songwriter. He toured Europe, inspiring millions of people to love the blues, and also inspired your favorite rock musicians. He was married 3 times, but he's resting here next to his second wife, Geneva, who died of cancer in 1973, and Muddy passed away 10 years later in 1983 from heart failure at the age of 70. Chester Arthur Bennett, also known as Howlin Wolf, was named after the 21st president, and he grew up in Mississippi and had an abusive childhood before moving from family to family. He ran away, learned the blues in Mississippi Delta from Charlie Patton, and he was also influenced by Blind Lemon Jefferson, Ma Rainey, and Tampa Red. He did time in jail and also served in the Army before moving to Chicago. He was discovered by Ike Turner and formed his own band. His most famous song was Smokestack Lightning, and he toured the world and inspired numerous blues musicians. He got to perform with such musicians as Sonny Boy Williamson, Robert Johnson, Willie Brown, Son House, Willie Johnson. He was an amazing performer. Here he rests with his wife, Lily. He passed away at the age of 65 in 1976, and he was posthumously inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1980. Here's to Howlin Wolf. Now, the next Blues Hall of Famer that we're going to talk about is Willie Dixon. If you haven't seen our video on Willie Dixon before, definitely go check that out. But just to recap, Willie Dixon was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1915. He was an absolute pioneer when it came to the blues. Most of the blues artists that you know and love, the songs were written and composed by him. He is not only a Blues Hall of Famer, he's a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, and he's also in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He passed away in 1992 at the age of 76, and here he rests here in Burnt Oak in Alsip, Illinois. Now, Little Walters Jacob was born in Louisiana. He was a singer, songwriter, and a harmonica player. He also played guitar. Actually, his first recording was backing Floyd Jones on guitar. He backed numerous musicians, including Sonny Boy Williamson, Muddy Waters, Hound Dog Taylor, Coco Taylor, Bo Diddley, like so many musicians, Junior Wells. Juke, his single was the first and only harmonica song to hit #1 on the Billboard charts. And he actually got into a lot of fights, and he was a bit of a drunk, and he died at the age of 37 after dying in his sleep from a fight the night before at his girlfriend's house here in Chicago. Little Walters rests at St. Mary's Cemetery in Evergreen Park, Illinois. We previously visited the grave of Jimmy Reed. over at Lincoln Cemetery. So if you haven't seen that video, make sure that you check that out. That should be Lincoln Cemetery Part 3, where we visited the grave of Jimmy Reed. But just to recap, he was born in Mississippi in 1925, and he was a blues musician and songwriter, and he inspired various musicians such as Elvis and Hank Williams Jr., and also the Rolling Stones. And he played at Chess Records and VJ Records, and he even toured Europe with the American Folk Blues Festival, and he passed away in Oakland, California from respiratory failure at the age of 50. And last but not least, we're actually going to visit the grave of Otis Spann, who was a blues musician, and he actually backed Muddy Waters in his band. He is buried here at Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois, with Willie Dixon and Dinah Washington and other notables that we have seen before. If you haven't checked out those videos, definitely do. He's also played with Buddy Guy, Big Mama Thornton, Fleetwood Mac. I mean, he has played with so many musicians and also recorded under Chess Records with his own music. He's backed Chuck Berry, B.B. King. I mean, like, really, he is a absolute artist. So definitely learn more about his life. We covered most of the blues musicians that are buried here in Chicago, but there are some honorable mentions that were inducted in 1980 that we did not cover because they aren't buried here in Chicago, and I do want to make sure that we give them their props. So those musicians are... So we also didn't get to talk about B.B. King. We didn't get to talk about Robert Johnson. We didn't get to talk about John Lee Hooker. We didn't get to talk about Bessie Smith, who was an absolute freaking legend. We didn't get to talk about all of these other legends. So definitely check out those. Hopefully we get to those graves later on in our series, but we just covered the ones that were buried here in Chicago today. So we hope to see you next time on Tombstone Tea for our next installment of the Blues Hall of Fame.